Welcome to the Paru Zings Appraisers on Purpose podcast. This podcast showcases inspiring appraisers and professionals from the industry who are leaders in their field. How did they get to where they are? What have they learned along the way? And what do they do now for their teams, their clients, and the industry? Your host is real estate investor, entrepreneur, and appraiser, Michael Hobbs.
Thank you for once again joining us. I am very excited today to have both a friend and a peer in Woody Fincham joining the Perusings, the Power of Values podcast, as we continue to uncover how does someone not only get into the profession, but more importantly, all the different opportunities and advantages that come to those that continue to not only stay in the industry, but invest in themselves and invest in the wonderful experience of solving problems for clients. Today is definitely one of these engaging conversations and an engaging personality in Woody. So welcome, Woody.
Hey, thanks, Mike. I'm happy to be here.
Thanks, buddy. Appreciate it. So we always love to start out with the most interesting of interesting questions. And that is, Woody, were you born into the industry or did you take a wrong turn at Albuquerque, as Bugs Bunny used to say?
Yeah, like most people, I fell into it by accident. Sort of accident, it was just, I don't know. I hate to use the word fate, but after watching a superhero movie last night that used the word fate about 30 times, it's in my mind. So my brother, older brother by 20 years, is an FHA consultant. He does 203K consulting, which is, the rehab loans. Yeah. And when I came out of high school, I had a little bit of a computer background, more so than he did, because he, 20 years my senior, he was good with MS-DOS, but wasn't so great with Windows and things like that.
Yeah.
And so he needed some help with that. So I started helping him. With my family being a contracting background, my father was a contractor and several of my relatives as well. It was a natural progression. So my brother just said, hey, man, I'll pay you this much a week. You can just come out and help me do this. And the data collection part of that was just like appraising. We were sketching properties. We were making notes, mostly with HUD 203Ks. You're dealing with properties that need rehab. They don't meet minimum property requirements. So we were doing that kind of stuff. And I did that for a couple of years and came across one of our fellow designees, William Whitley. He's a MAI SRA. He was doing a 203K. And I got to talking to him while I was measuring the house. And he started telling me what he did as an appraiser. At that point, he wasn't designated. He was just doing residential work. And we got to talking. I'm like, man, that's really similar to what I do. And then I went and took some classes at the local college and found a mentor locally and, just started out. It was just kind of fell into it.
I understand that experience completely. Similar in some ways, even to how I got there. But so here you go through some family exposure. So real estate wasn't unfamiliar to you. You mentioned family having a contracting background and your older brother being an FHA 203K consultant, which is a very important role, especially for those that utilize that program, help them acquire a home and make the necessary improvements so that it fulfills the minimum health and safety requirements for occupancy. And then you go and actually meet someone who's doing the valuation of the property, not just the property assessment.
Fortuitous, I guess, is the best way to say it.
That's a great way to put it. And you use the word mentor. So obviously it was someone who was in the industry and had some experience. How long were you able to work with them? And what was that experience like for you?
I'm a bit of an overachiever with all the letters behind my name. I think it's self-evident, but and more to come. Long story short, the first couple of firms I worked for they were journeyman appraisers. They were doing mostly only mortgage work. Matter of fact, one of them wouldn't do anything but mortgage work.
Oh,
they were not interested in being in a witness box or doing consulting or anything like that. At that point, appraisers were still able to talk to loan officers, and that's who pretty much greased the wheels as far as getting your work locally.
Yes.
And no appraisal management companies whatsoever in any of either of the two firms that I worked with at the time. Long story short, I figured out real quickly that, and there's nothing wrong with mortgage work, but I figured out rather quickly that commoditized service work was just not a sustainable business model in the sense that at some point, the market's going to cycle and we're not going to have a lot of work, so forth and so on. I went out on my own in 2004, and which was a great time to go out on my own. We built a firm in Virginia Beach that we ended up selling in 2008, just as everything was starting to fall apart.
Wonderful timing.
Moved on to some, it's luck, man.
Hey, man, sometimes it's better to be lucky than good. Congratulations on that one. So
yeah.
You sold out in 2008, and then let me assume you were so wise, you just took a year off and traveled the world.
No. I was about halfway through getting my SRA designation with the Appraisal Institute. And I had met David Braun, who's an MAI
Yeah.
SRA in Knoxville, Tennessee. You might know
Hmm.
Creighton Cross. Creighton
Yep.
bought his firm from him. Creighton's a dear friend. He's with David being designated and also an instructor for the AI. I had met him when I was on the labs group for a la mode,
Oh,
and
okay.
we were one of the 4 appraisers that got selected to kind of whiteboard and do a little R&D and stuff like that for what a la mode was developing at the time. I mean, what became Total for mobile and all that came out of our group.
I see.
So I met him through that, really liked him. David was very academic in the way he approached it, did a lot of
Hmm.
litigation work, was in a small town. Knoxville's not a huge city. So we moved out there for a year and I worked for him and finished up my classes for my SRA. And then I got
Oh,
really
wow.
sick, needed something better than small business insurance. Spent about a week in the hospital with pancreatitis. I put the brakes on working for a private firm and actually found a job working for the city of Newport News, which is back in Virginia. I moved back
Hmm.
home and took a job there as a staff appraiser. And that turned into 6 years working for municipal and state government. I went from working at Newport News as a staff appraiser to being the deputy assessor at the city of Suffolk. And then from there, we
Got
moved
it.
up to Albemarle County, which is where the University of Virginia is, Charlottesville, Virginia. And I was the deputy assessor there for a year before moving on to the state and working for the state tax department doing conservation easement work. So sorry, it's a long list, but
That's fascinating, though, because in a short amount of time, you went from just, as you said, helping out your brother to getting an opportunity to work with a number of different
Mhm.
peers in the industry, peers in the sense that you were a professional and they were a professional. You got exposure to different ways that they were conducting their business, different types of clients they were focusing on, then choosing to step out from an entrepreneurial perspective, grow a firm, exit the firm, and then through relationships, getting exposed to other people and opportunities. And through that, then still making a intentional choice to move, as you pointed out, from the private side to a more stable and, say, insurance focused with regular compensation position that brought you into the whole assessment side of the property, moving all the way up to a state level, and then getting into conservation easements, many things of which people many decades in the profession haven't even experienced.
Sure, sure.
That's phenomenal.
Yeah. Yeah, that's one of my mentors once told me that you want to work with people who want to work with you, not with people that have to work with you.
It's
And
a great
having gone through
perspective.
that evolution just taught me, I need to be over here where nobody else wants to work. So that year that I spent doing conservation and easement and historical facade easement review work for the state led me into understanding that, complex property is really where you want to be if you want to be able to control your destiny as far as what you're doing in the profession.
Yes, that's a fantastic point I'd love to highlight again. And that is when you have the choice, and you do have choice, to move in the direction that you work with people that want to work with you, not people that have to work with you.
Right.
Yeah, that is such a high level spotlight. And as a result of that, how long did you stay in the review capacity for the state on the conservation easements?
I spent a year there and probably would have remained longer, but my mother got sick and passed. When that happened, I burned up a lot of my leave and things like that. And you lose a parent, you're not in a great spot mentally. And I was going to Richmond 4 days a week, which is about an hour and 20-minute commute from where I was to get to downtown Richmond. I was a little burned out with it. So at that point, I had reached out to a colleague who owned a firm that was turning into a national firm.
Oh, I
And
see.
and I went to work for them as an appraiser and then moved up to being their chief residential appraiser for a couple of years. And we had about 200, I guess, appraisers at that point over like 25 or 26 states at that juncture. So, which they've gone on to be bought by a big company out of Australia, and now they're part of a bigger conglomerate, I guess is the right word.
Yes. And so here you go. And I think this is the beauty of this type of conversation. And really one of the fundamental takeaways we hope people get from the podcast is from wherever you start, you have no idea how far you can go and how high you can ascend. And within, I would say, a relatively short period of time, you went from being someone new in the profession. Clearly, you're someone who values education, your reference to investing time and energy, and therefore your hard earned resources in both learning and achieving designations to signify your knowledge. And you get to the point of being a chief real estate appraiser for residential for a firm that had 200 team members, I think you said across half the US states.
Yeah,
It's a
that's right.
phenomenal accomplishment. What was it like getting into that role of a chief real estate appraiser, given that you'd already worked at a state, you'd already worked at the local assessor, you'd been on the other side of the experience, and now you descended to kind of sitting almost above it, where I think it's fair to assume, or at least maybe highlight for people, in a chief real estate appraiser role, it's not like you're running out seeing properties every day.
Well, I mean, actually, I was, because I was a producing manager.
Oh, you're a producing manager.
Yeah, so
Interesting take on things.
living in Charlottesville, and they were headquartered at the time in Chicago and on the Delmar Peninsula, coast of Maryland. Didn't have any presence in Charlottesville, so I just started picking up work here. And Charlottesville is a very unique market in the sense that it's a very small MSA, but there's a lot of wealth here. There's a lot of estates and things like that. I found a niche doing that and producing. My main job when I was in the position as chief appraiser was to do as much training as I could, but really to assist with the appraisers who were coming along when they run into something that was maybe outside of their wheelhouse, helping them obtain some competency by partnering up and things like that. Unfortunately, we had a couple of state board complaints that I had to get involved with, review with them, and look at what we could have done better, or did we do anything wrong at all? And
yeah,
in some cases, it was on either side. So if it was a case where we could have done better, then we, talk to the appraiser about it and try to figure out what's the best foot forward to improve, whichever state it's in, because some states are very Machiavellian about how they handle it, and some are very very friendly about it. So I don't know if you can ever call a state board complaint friendly, but you know what I mean.
They seek to acknowledge where there's a deficiency, but not have someone so experience their shortcoming that they leave the profession.
Right.
As opposed to others that are like, oh, we're going to hit you with a spear. We might just have to hang you out for a little while. Like that's just a whole different experience. Like, who wants to be part of that type of community? Because there's no one that's perfect, first of all. Second, I don't envy, and I'm grateful for peers that choose to serve on state boards. But I mean, that's a tough spot. Like, is there willful intent to do wrong in an appraisal? Well, in that case, maybe they need the spear and to be hung out. But I would, again, no knowledge of this myself, but I would like to assume that the majority of times there's just a gap in knowledge. And however it came about, that's where this individual is at. And how can we both help them understand where they made a mistake, help restore them, and then ultimately get them out and can have them continue to be a productive member of the industry, contributing to society?
Absolutely. I mean, Colorado, I'll highlight them. I mean, they have a great way of addressing complaints. Unless it's something really egregious, they're going to look at your report. They'll find the deficiencies in it. And if there's a reason, once they get through their informal fact finding, their IFF, then they will reach out to the appraiser and say, okay, this is what we've got. This is not a super serious offense, but it's something that you obviously have a gap of knowledge in. So they will give you the option at your own expense now. They have several, mentor appraisers that they've got a list of, and they'll send you to one of them and say, you have to go to them and say, hey, look, I'm with the state board's giving me this option instead of getting a sanction to, over the course of a year, I'm going to write 3 of my reports have to go to you. You have to review them, and hopefully over each subsequent review, I get a little bit better, and you can mentor me through it. Now, you do have to pay the appraiser doing that, and it's out of your own pocket. But I think that's a wonderful way to do it, because you said, our profession's really odd in that when you get a certification or a license, you know just enough to get in trouble. You just don't know what you don't know. And until you've experienced some of those things out there, we're also charged with policing our own competency. Well, if you don't know what you don't know, how do you know if you're not competent to do something other than obvious things? Like if I'm doing a residential assignment and it's zoned commercially, I mean, I should know right away. I probably need to be a CG to do this. But, you get into a lot of nuance in our profession, and there's things that you may not obviously be incompetent to do if you don't know any better.
It's a great point today. How do you know what you don't know? And the answer is you don't. And especially if you are someone who, maybe like yourself, kind of brought along early on in the industry with a person or two at a time, not exposed to the larger firm you ended up with over 200 people. That's just a lot more brain trust to contribute insight, perspective, feedback, as well as blind spots. I mean, I think that's been one of the most interesting experiences I've had. And obviously, founding reason for the podcast is, how do we help peers cover blind spots? And how do we both expose individuals that are not familiar with the industry and actually have the industry as a blind spot for them? Like, I didn't even know it was out there. It's like, oh yeah, it's right over there. You just can't see it. But maybe we'll highlight some of that for you.
Sure.
That's fantastic. So you had this opportunity to ascend, or you joined the firm, and you ultimately rose to being the chief real estate appraiser for residential. I hear you talk about the importance of training and supporting peers. And how was that experience for you? And how long were you there? And then what came next?
I started there in 2013, and I stayed there until I went back out on my own in 2019. So five
Oh,
or
okay.
6 years. It was a mixed bag. I mean, like anything, there's pluses and minuses,
Yes.
and that's all about the experience, or the road to experience. I'm not a fan of big companies in the sense that there's just, even with a small firm like I have, we just got a few people in our firm, and it's mostly family actually. You're always balancing quality and quantity. Those are the two things as a appraisal firm you always have to look at. You don't want to do so much quantity that you decrease your quality, and you also don't want to do way too much quality, like you're trying to write a demonstration report on
Exactly.
everything that you do, because you'll, on a $600 or $500 assignment, you'll put $1,400 worth of work into it. It's just, you got to figure out where that balancing beam is. And
Yes.
when you're dealing with a lot of appraisers, volume becomes an issue. You got to hit a minimum amount. Now, that wasn't a problem in those years because the market was ramping up. So all the big firms out there that have been formed, and some of them have been bought by
Yes.
larger companies. And it's going to be interesting in the next couple of years to see how they actually work, the ones that haven't been bought, because it's the Wild West when you have that many employees. And I mean, with the refinance market basically being dead now, how do you exist if you're only doing mortgage work? Because when you're in a bigger firm like that, specialization is very difficult to do on residential. I've always, well, not always, but since I've been out on my own, and when I was doing that spot, I was doing a lot of, I guess, bespoke work where we're doing
Yes.
big estates and things like that, or relationships with attorneys locally doing litigation assignments. And that's the kind of stuff I thrive on. But your normal everyday journeyman appraiser doesn't want to do it, number one. And number two, the larger firms don't understand how to work those things in, because a bigger state like that, you're used to doing, 3 or 4 appraisal inspections a day. You got a team helping you write, that
Hmm.
kind of thing. It's all about putting volume out as best the quality as you can. When you're doing litigation work, I might have a simple divorce that I have, 25 or 30 hours in, because of
Exactly.
what I'm dealing with between both spouses and the attorney, what they need, or can I get into the property? I mean, the story. I mean, sometimes you got to get a sheriff to come out and escort you through, and it's crazy.
It's a life experience that I hope everyone has at least once, and maybe you don't want to repeat.
Yeah, for sure.
But I mean, it's a great point that you raise, and because and when I say raise, I'm referring to having had the opportunity to experience many different facets of the industry. You were able, still at a point where you're young and healthy, to be able to choose and say, I want to commit my time and my effort in this direction going forward. You could have also easily come to the conclusion of, hey, you know what? I recognize I'm in an area that's not necessarily as large as others, but I don't want to do specialty work. I don't want to do contentious. I don't want to work in a contentious environment,
Right.
aka litigation. I'd rather just kind of stay in the bread and butter, median priced home or homes, and just do more of that, which is totally acceptable. A lot of people choose that. One of the maybe challenges is that there's not a lot of newness. There's not a lot of opportunities to really both apply so much of the advanced learning that you have gained and continue to share, but also it's that experience of, oh yeah, been there, done that. Okay, check the box. Versus, wow, okay, so this one not only is maybe a massive home on massive acreage, but we got water now too. Oh, and we
Yeah.
got some special rights,
Yep.
and then that's just okay. That's it's kind of like being in the gym. Let's flex a little bit here.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing wrong with doing everyday mortgage use work. I mean, if that's what you thrive on and
Hmm.
you're good at it, go do it. I
Yep.
have no illusion that that's, somehow lesser work or anything like that. I know some of our
Yeah.
colleagues do think that way. I mean, whatever floats your boat, go do it as far as that goes. But I thrive in that. I mean, the other stuff. I mean, I when I'm lecturing and when I'm teaching classes and things like that, I always make a joke that if I never measure another townhouse for the rest of my career, I'll consider it a success. But I measure townhouses every week because it's part of what we do is in our normal, because our firm does specialty work, but we also do some mortgage related work as well.
Yes. I hear a couple things you've touched on, and I do have the benefit of knowing a bit more about your background, but for others that may not know that, I heard you mention early on you had an opportunity to be involved I think you referred to it as some labs activity. That's how you met David Braun.
Yeah.
How did that come about for you? That's an interesting exposure opportunity that most people don't even know exists.
Honestly, that's really what kind of put me on, like, anybody knowing me at more than a local level, right?
Yes.
It was 2004 or 5. Are you a total user by chance?
I happen to be a total user.
And you've been using them for a while?
More than 20 years.
Okay, so you remember when they went from to Aurora, right? There was a
Oh, yes.
bunch of issues with it, right?
Oh,
So
yes. We had quite some fun conversations.
what I didn't know about technology at the time is that, and this is leading into answering your question,
Of course, of
but
course.
each version that they did, and all of them had like a Greek name. There was Aurora and Athena, and
Hmm.
whatever. The last one I think was Aurora, and what they would do is, instead of building a new platform, they always would upgrade it to a new version, but they built it on the previous one. So
Yes.
every sub version below it had its own bugs. And by
Yes.
the time you got to Aurora, you had like 12 levels of bugs and all this
Yes.
extra code written for it. Being an appraiser, I don't even know if what I'm saying makes sense from a code perspective, but I was very vocal, very critical of it, because I mean, there were times for a couple of days where we were just shut down at the
Exactly.
time. And at their office in Oklahoma City, just outside of Oklahoma City, I mean, I understood from what I was talking to the reps about that. I mean, they had like their QC people were sleeping on bunks in the back room because it was just triage going on, because
Oh, goodness.
a lot of firms around the country were just basically shut down.
Yes.
Anyway, I complained a little bit about it, and then they decided at that time that they were going to just go ahead and do a complete rebuild, and that's what became Total. And they reached out to the subscriber base and said, "Hey, we're thinking about doing this, what we're going to call the Labs project. In order to do this, we need you to write an essay." So I wrote an essay that we sent off to Adam Calvary, was the guy that was heading up the project at the time, and sent it off to Adam. And basically, it was talking about Aurora, and it was like, it's important whenever you're doing anything it's not whether you can do something, it's whether you should do something. And they didn't do enough QC testing on that, and when it was sent out to the user base, the implementation was horrible. Somehow struck a chord with him, and next thing I know, I'm being flown out to Oklahoma City to meet with them in person. And there was myself, David Braun, Jim Simmons from Modesto, California, and the only non-appraiser in the group was Jeff Jones, who was or still is, an IT guy who specialized in setting up servers and stuff for appraisers. I mean,
Oh, I
his
see.
bigger group. We basically just, for a couple of years, they were paying us a stipend monthly to
Hmm.
get together, and we would work on individual research projects and group research projects where we were whiteboarding different things. And what became Total for mobile, and what's been built into Spectrum and stuff, like a lot of those things, the genesis of it was in that group. So, and the new co-op data sharing that they're doing was something that we came up with,
Oh,
but
wow.
they wouldn't implement it until after CoreLogic bought them. Once CoreLogic bought them, then they said, "Oh,
Mm.
this is a great idea." Of course, CoreLogic is in the business of selling data, so that's why they do that.
Oh, yeah,
So,
very much so. I don't know that a lot of people are familiar with that, especially if they're not using that program or if they happen to be in commercial versus residential. But
mhm.
a la mode was sold and it was bought by CoreLogic. They had most of the residential work is done on templates, if you will, kind of a standard form. And this is a software that helps you populate that. Now you're referring to something called co-op. What is that, Woody?
So the actual name of it's different than co-op, but basically what it is, it's a comps database that you
Hmm.
can opt in or opt out of. It's not done on your subject property, because your subject property information, for whatever reason, even though it's just property characteristics, most appraisers aren't comfortable with that part of it.
Yes.
But if I opt in, if I go research a comp and put it into my system, it will then, when I'm done with it, upload it to their cloud, and then other appraisers have the opportunity to look at it.
Hmm.
It's been a very effective tool in seeing, like, if I'm in a subdivision, where 13 other appraisers have used a similar comp, I get to
Yes.
look at, how did they consider this, what quality rating and what condition rating it was it
Yes.
rated at, and different things like that. I mean, what square footage was used. I mean, all the property characteristics are there.
Yes.
And essentially, it's just the grid that you normally would see in your form software. It's basically there to assist other appraisers. I think some appraisers are using it as a supplement to going out and looking at property, from what I understand. But
Sure.
I will mention that it's still on you to drive by them if your assignment conditions require you to drive by them.
It's an important point.
Yeah.
Very important point. And can kind of circling up a level, I also heard you mention, and I am familiar with this, that you not only do litigation work and are an expert witness, but I heard you mention that you've gotten into instructing.
Yeah.
How did that come about, and what is that like?
Well, when I got into the profession, like I'm an overachiever. My wife will shake her head at this, I'm sure. She's an earshot, so I'm always trying to figure out how to better whatever I'm doing. Like any alpha personality, I'm my biggest critic, so I'm always like, well, look, there's something wrong. I've got to make it better, right? So when I first got in the profession, I started looking at, well, where can you go? And designations were something that I found out about. And, of course, anytime you research appraisal designations, the appraisal institute's going to pop up. So I was like, I'm interested, and then I found out what an SRA was, MAI, of course, and then went to a chapter meeting. Actually, Rick Borges, who became president later on, and they were doing like a 2-hour meeting at one of the country clubs locally, and I was like, this is what you need to do to write your demonstration report. At this point, I'm just an appraiser. I have no idea what they're even talking about, but I'm like, I'll go. So I go and I meet him, and then that was in like 2005, 2006.
Okay.
Fast forward, by 2011, I've gotten my SRA. Then I went to LDAC. Once I started.
And what is LDAC? Because people outside the
Yeah.
industry don't know what it is. Many people inside the industry don't even know what LDAC is.
So LDAC, it's the best thing I've ever done in my career. I'll mention that first, but it's Leadership Development Advisory Council. And what it is the Strategic Planning Committee from the Appraisal Institute puts together a series of potential strategic goals that they want to look at. And so what they do with LDAC is they bring together about 100 participating professionals from all over the country, and they are brought in to sit through 4 sessions read by discussion leaders. And the discussion leaders basically are assigned topic from SPC and from the executive committee. They pick something out of like a list of like 15 or 20 of these things. You go into this think tank basically over a couple of days, and there's 4 sessions, and you're sitting in there and you're discussing these things, and it's a give and take. And it's wonderful because most appraisers don't do a lot of networking. They don't do a lot of collegial stuff. This is the most collegial thing I've ever been involved with in my life. So when you go, you usually are going to go for 3 years. At 3 years, you time out. I was fortunate enough to have convinced them or fooled them, I'm not sure which, to bring me back the 4th year to become one of the discussion leaders.
Oh, wow.
And
so congratulations.
So I got to spend 4 years doing that. When I was doing the discussion leader thing, I was like, I really like this working in front of a group, like speaking, because when you're a discussion leader, you're not really there to push your opinions. You're there to facilitate discourse and debate, professional debate, not throwing stuff at each other, but which appraisers are known to do sometimes. Long story short, I really enjoyed it, and then went through the instructor's qualification requirement in Chicago, and I passed through that and started teaching after that. Instructing will make you a better appraiser because you're not teaching it for you to understanding it. You might be teaching it to 30 different people in the class that all have different ways of learning.
Yes.
So you have to, number one, part of the instructor qualification courses that you go through, you learn about how adults learn, right? So,
yes.
And it's all about communication and how you present and all this. And there's a whole science behind it. So, of course, I took that and then started doing some subsequent reading and, watching videos and stuff like that about people who do that kind of thing. That was the first step for me actually moving into litigation, wanting to do litigation work, because I don't think you can find a better witness than someone who teaches, because they are used to dealing with a gallery of people, which could be a jury, could be a room full of students. There's always going to be someone in the class, God love them, that ask a lot of questions. And sometimes they will ask very outlandish questions, which really does prepare you for cross-examination. So there's a lot of parallels between the two. So, but I enjoy the instructing more so because it sharpens me. I learn more than I think the students do sometimes. Of course, they're there to learn about whatever topic I'm maybe instructing on that day or over the course of days. But in the end, it really comes down to I've got to understand it at a very low level in order to get the point across. And when someone asks you a question from a certain perspective, you often as an instructor going, you know what, I've never thought about it that way, but you're onto something, and I'm glad you asked that question. And then later on, it prompts me to later on do some more research in that vein. And it may change the way I lecture on it. It certainly may change the way I'm looking at it when I'm actually doing practical work.
That's fantastic. And so you mentioned on more than one occasion, definitely want to jump in a little further. What type of litigation work do you do, and how do you find that interaction in the marketplace, and how I distinguish interaction in the marketplace between, at a certain point in your career, you were someone who was probably doing a lot more mortgage work, and that interaction was just maybe with a lender or directly with an AMC,
Hmm.
and it was like pretty constant, versus when you move into litigation, you're not, there's no AMCs, there's no lenders. Basically, it's attorneys, can be the individual, can be the plaintiff or the defendant, maybe the counselor of law, could be the arbiter, could be
Hmm.
a judge, as well as moving into specialty work. It's quite a different rhythm to the work and quite a different level of interaction. So that's, how has that shown up for you, and how do you continue, like what is that satisfaction and the learning that you find through that experience?
It's a difficult transition to make because if your bread and butter is doing volume work with, mortgage servicing work, I mean, you have to constantly feed that beast because it's a volume game. If you think you want to do litigation work, do your research on it because it's not for everyone. Just like mortgage lending work is not for everyone. Everybody thinks about mortgage lending because it's the largest user base that we have. But again, work for people that want to work with you versus people who have to work with you. Mortgage people have to work with you. And that's why a lot of appraisal management companies only care that you're one, credentialed, and two, the cheapest and the fastest. Very cutthroat way to work. With litigation, you've got either clients that are in some type of civil action or the actual attorneys calling you and they're seeking out an expert that's willing to sit in a witness box and talk about this, or go to a deposition and talk about it, or go to an arbitration or a mediation or something of that nature. Sometimes board of equalization, you got to go do that with a county if that's the case. You really got to know your stuff because an astute attorney is really going to, on a cross, is going to ask you a lot of hard questions. And the hard questions that ultimately end up separating litigation specialists from non-litigation specialists in the appraisal field are actually fundamental academic questions. Like if you've got an attorney who understands what a sales comparison adjustment is and
Yes.
why you make them and how you make them, a lot of mortgage appraisers, unfortunately, don't get to that granular of a level. They oftentimes are making, and if this offends anybody, I'm sorry, I'm not trying to do that. I'm just calling it as I see it. But I mean, if you don't understand how your square footage adjustment was made, why you made it, and from what methodology you use, there's certain techniques and methodologies that we have to use. We don't have to use, but we have to look at using. So are you using regression? Are you using paired sales? Are you using group paired sales? Are you using depreciated cost? Are you using some type of GRM derived? There's all kinds of ways to do it. But if you're not able to have that conversation at a 1,000-foot level with an attorney, they can disqualify you pretty quickly. Not disqualify you, maybe you get qualified. And then there are cases where judges will look at the judge and say, or the jury rather, and say, jury, we need you to disregard everything this witness has just said because the appraiser got walked into a box and unfortunately, they couldn't get out of it because of logical fallacies in their testimony. That's being an instructor and someone who likes that kind of thing and someone who's taken the time to learn how to do that type of analysis. If you want to do litigation, that's where you have to be at. It is a very hard field to work in and be successful in. If you go into court and you lose a case for someone because of your inability to testify at a competent level, that attorney will never call you. And where I'm at here in Charlottesville, very small population. The judges get to know real quickly, and the other attorneys know very quickly whether or not you're someone worth talking to.
That's a great point. And not that people in the profession don't experience that in multiple capacities, but the stakes are a lot higher
Mhm.
in litigation and specialty work, as I hear you touching on at this point in time.
Yep.
That's a great thing to highlight. I think might also be helpful, and I think people really get a sense of that just hearing how you've approached your career and being involved in this profession. But what would you say for yourself are those characteristics of the work that has you not only choose to invest more of your time and effort in it, but that you derive satisfaction from?
Well, I like solving problems. I mean, I think that if you're going to be an appraiser at any high level, you have to enjoy that part of it. We're putting a puzzle together. You're figuring things out that even your client may not be aware that you need to figure out. I mean, I get called sometimes to do work that might really need to have someone who's experienced with subdivision analysis. You got a big piece of land that can be broken up, but it's zoned agricultural or something that's non-commercial. Again, we spoke earlier about, not knowing what you don't know. And I know looking at that we could probably break it up and get 100 lots out of it. And 100 lots current rates that's a pretty valuable piece of real estate.
Yes.
You got to understand that first and foremost. And Michael, I just went off on a rabbit trail on you.
It's all right. It's totally good. So that actually works fine because you answered the question, and then it sets up something that we haven't yet talked about, but I'm very familiar with, and some people may also know this about you, and that is it allows a person to professionally pursue things of interest to them. And one for you is in the area of sustainability and high performance, something that you've invested a lot of time and effort in, and have really contributed to advancing the body of knowledge.
Yeah, that's been a fun thing to do. And I'd like to say I got started in that because I'm a hippie and I like green stuff, but I do like
good
green
stuff too, especially more in certain states than others.
Oh, I like where you went with that. It was very green oriented, but not sustainability oriented. I went out on a property, I don't know, 8 or 9 years ago, and one of the local agents here in Charlottesville that specializes in sustainable homes has made a career out of it. Was like, do you know anybody who does green homes? And I'm like, not really, but we had just done the professional development thing at the Appraisal Institute, that's the registry and this works for you whether you're a member or not a member. It's the only professional registry that we have where we'll allow non-members to be on it because there are not enough appraisers across the United States doing green or sustainable work. And it's a real niche to feed. That needs to be filled. So anyway, this agent, his name's Greg Slater. Greg and I have become great colleagues over the years because of it. It was like, we need appraisers that recognize, Pearl certifications or HER scores or what have you. And because all appraisers at that point are going, there's no market data, thus it has no value. So, which wasn't actually the case, but I'll get to that. But
that's
part of the story later.
Common dismissal that comes up.
Oh yeah. Anyway, so I knew that we had the classes. When I took my demo alternative, I took it through Sandy Adamatis teaching it, and I got to know Sandy through that. And then when I became an instructor, I got to become one of her peers. And I say that very lightly because I don't really consider myself a peer. Sandy's up here. I'm way down here. I'm still evolving.
You're in the room. Let's put it that way. You're in the room.
I'm just through the doorway, right? Sandy has become a good friend and a mentor to me over the years. I took the green classes with her, came back to Charlottesville and said, okay, you guys need somebody doing this kind of work. I'm happy to do it. Well, Pearl certification is headquartered here in Charlottesville.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And Charlottesville is actually a very leading edge market when it comes to residential sustainability. It's a very common thing. Mm-hmm. All the builders decided many years ago that they were going to start building new homes and they would have sustainable features in the property. A lot of them were having issues with appraisers coming out and not knowing any of this and just saying it has no value. So anyway, fast forward a couple of years, Sandy reaches out to me and says, hey, we're getting ready to do a project for Pearl. We're writing a white paper. I'm going to be the author on it, meaning Sandy is going to be the author on it. We're going to look at Charlottesville, Northern Virginia, and Maryland. So I'm going to hire you to do all the paired sales analysis work in Charlottesville. And then a colleague by the name of Don Boucher. I know you know Don.
Yep.
Don was the appraiser who worked on the other stuff. We did all of that analysis. She wrote up this great white paper in 2017. It got published, and we actually did a presentation on it at the AI conference the next year. We tried to get it published in the journal, but for whatever reason, they wouldn't take it. That's a career goal, is for me to get in the journal some way or somehow. But fast forward 5 years from that, they reach out, or 4 years from that, and they're like, hey, Woody, we want to do this again. Sandy's too busy to do this.
Oh, okay.
But Charlottesville is a prolific market for us. Can you do the same study again? And I'm like, sure. We negotiated a fee. Then after that, they're like, oh, well, now we want to do 3 more markets and put it together as a semi-national thing. So we ended up hiring appraisers in Phoenix, Boston, and I believe Ann Arbor up in Michigan, and combined it with the Charlottesville data. And we just published out a white paper on whether or not Pearl certifications add any value to the real estate transaction. In both studies, Sandy's study and my study, and Sandy actually wrote our foreword for our new white paper. And
oh, great!
And we've had both of those were peer reviewed by other appraisers who do green work or sustainable work. And now we've got that out, and it did show that there is a premium involved with the markets that are recognizing it. So that's been a very fruitful evolution of relationships. And I consider Pearl to be one of my better clients because they've done a lot to get me involved, and because of that, I've been out to the NAR convention to speak on sustainability, and I have a very strong presence in the market here locally.
Yes.
to do that kind of work. And again, I'd like to say that I got into it because there was about granola and being a hippie, but it's not, it wasn't. I just saw an opportunity as a business person.
Yes.
But in the meantime, we now have solar panels in our home that do contribute value, and we're happy to have it. And we have a Pearl certified home on top of it. And
Yes.
I mean, I'm not just doing the work. I actually believe in it because I've seen that it does work.
I think that's fascinating. And just maybe to fill in a couple gaps for others that may not be as familiar with some of the things you touched on, NAR stands for the National Association of Realtors. Pearl is a company that submitted for and got accepted to the REACH program, which is a real estate accelerator. NAR does this every year. Think of it's kind of like a seed fund where they are looking for technology companies that help advance things that are important to them, meaning the National Association of Realtors. And Pearl was one of those companies back just under a decade ago. And they're in the business of helping property owners quantify the contributions to their home, the changes that they make that differentiate their home in the marketplace, and specifically in the area of green and sustainability. Cynthia and Robin, I think, were the ones that originally were at REACH back when I first met them. And they had this audacious goal. And it is beautiful to see that not even a decade later, they're having a significant impact in particular markets and ultimately across the United States to help property owners differentiate the value of their property above their neighbors, where two homes might necessarily look the same from the outside and they're significantly different. And this is a third party validation and verification of those characteristics, which gives confidence to the marketplace, which then supports price premium. And great to hear that you've been involved in this. I think you literally said recently published study from Pearl in 4 different markets that continues to advance this ultimately buyer and seller behavior.
Yeah, and it was great because I do like to get into that sales comparison analysis so deeply. We got to do a lot of that with that project. It was
nice.
It was the perfect thing to do, and it really was probably the icing on our year this year. Because I mean, I don't want to make Robin nervous by saying this, but I mean, it literally was the best fee I charged all year to oversee that project.
It should be. I mean, you are an expert in the area, and the highlight here is that I want other people to come away with, if you haven't already tuned into this, that you too can make an investment in yourself and for the benefit of contributing to others. And in turn, the market rises up, meets you, and compensates you for it. I mean, think of anyone who is distinguished in what they do. Where do they get compensated on the spectrum? Are they at minimum wage? Are they breaking the scale?
Sure.
I'm not saying you're LeBron James by any stretch, and I'm not going out there saying you're the greatest of all times and one of the Williams sisters in tennis. But what I'm saying is you're definitely not a novice and a starter. And as people choose to take that on, the market does acknowledge and reward that contribution. So congratulations to you.
Yeah, for sure. And I'll add to that, when we were trying to find appraisers to fill in these research, because when you're working on a project like this, when I reach out to you as an appraiser and say, okay, you're in Phoenix, I don't know anything about Phoenix other than it's really hot and there's a lot of people there. So we need an appraiser on the ground. You're not actually writing appraisal reports. There's no real liability to you here from the traditional sense. So it's a good way to make money because you're getting paid to do it. You're getting paid a very fair wage or above fair wage to do this stuff. And you don't even have to sign a report for it. You're just going to do the research and then provide it to me in the format that I need it in. And then we're going to talk about it. We'll fine tune it because it's got to be, we had to test it, make sure that the data was reliable. And once I'm convinced that it's reliable, then it goes on to the publishing phase. But I mean, we reached out to appraisers in all these different markets. And I think we tried something like 15 or 20 different markets. And I kept getting no as an answer. Yeah. And that baffles me in some senses because it's like, okay, here's an opportunity for you to make money, minimal liability with it. If there's a such thing as no liability with it, because there's no client involved other than Pearl, who's publishing the paper. And if we don't like your work, we're just simply not going to use it. It's not like we're going to go back to you and say, we're going to sue you for it kind of thing. But I mean, if those opportunities come along to you, if you're the least bit open to being a little adventurous with it, do it because, in 5 years when they want to do it again, if they want to do it again, I may not be available to do the project, but they're most likely going to reach out to one of the appraisers that were involved with the project and say, hey, you know how this works now. let's talk about you heading it up this time and working with it. So it's just, opportunity knocks. It's just a matter of whether someone wants to listen or not, or open the door rather.
That's a great way to put it. It's a great way to put it. Well, as we move to wrapping up, maybe two things in closing. One, I appreciate that you didn't touch on it here, but you did mention that you have your own firm. You have some others involved in the firm as well. As you look out over what you consider the next phase or the rest of your career, what do you want to still do that you haven't done yet?
Oh, that's a big question. I'm actually balancing going to Virginia Commonwealth University to get my master's degree in real estate valuation.
Congratulations.
They're
Wonderful.
partnered up with the Appraisal Institute. When you're done with that program, you've met all your course requirements and most of your demonstration report requirements to get your MAI.
Oh, fantastic.
And it also allows you to get your CCIM as well.
Oh,
so
that's 2 thumbs up. Big fan of that community as well.
And for folks listening that don't know what the CCIM is, that's the commercial. It's a realtor's, the National Association of Realtors has a commercial side. And this is their big designation that they have for that. The same way the MAI is a big designation for appraisers. And so what it does is it opens up doors for appraisers to network with other CCIMs, and you can share data and get a lot of referral work out of it. Anyway, I'm looking at doing that. I mean, our firm here is moving along strongly. I'm happy to say that I'm partnered with my son, who owns half of the business with me, and he's coming along at 28 years old. So he's a second generation appraiser. And now I have 2 grandsons with him, and one of them I'm pretty sure is probably going to head in the same direction, even though he's only 18 months at this point.
Yeah, but you know what? You can get a LiDAR device in his hand right now and help him be doing floor plans.
For sure. He's a chip off the old block, so to speak, because my son Woody Jr. started, holding the dumb end of the tape, as I like to say, because when I was a single parent, so he did a lot of riding around with me doing mortgage assignments when he was a kid. That's, developing him and watching him succeed. I mean, I'm far from retiring because I'm only in my 40s. Hopefully I got another 20 or 30 years doing this. But I mean, it's all about building the firm up for him and getting him to a position where he's hopefully going to be recognized in the profession as I've been lucky to have been. From there, probably doing some teaching, more teaching. And one of my friends, Danny Wiley, has ended up over at Freddie Mac. I mean, I'm eyeing the stuff like that going, you know what? That may not be a bad place to be in 10 or 15 years. I don't know that Danny's that much older than I am, but Danny's a well-respected appraiser.
Wonderful guy. Wonderful. Yeah, actually, really one of our season 1 guests as well has a fantastic story to tell. So you're in phenomenal company there, Woody.
Yeah, Danny's a great guy, and seeing him move on to where he's moved on with his career, I mean, it's certainly worth emulating. But if I only just develop my firm and just continue to do specialization work, I mean, because at some point I myself personally would like to be completely out of doing regular mortgage work.
Just
because it's too cyclical. Our firm will probably always be involved with it at some level, but that's kind of where I'm looking at being in the next couple of years on the professional level.
Wonderful. And then in closing, because we have those that are both in the industry in different capacities, commercial, residential, specialty, whether they do primarily lending work or they do specialty work, we have those, and we hope that they've gained some perspective on how much more opportunity there is in the industry, but we also have those that are not in the industry at all, but might even consider this. What kind of encouragement might you offer them about wherever they're at now and what next steps they could take to have a meaningful opportunity in this profession?
So the appraisal profession is a weird one. And, most people in regular everyday life, outside of the appraisal or valuation profession, they don't know that we exist. I mean, when you're an undergrad student and you're, you may have heard of an appraiser, but you probably have no clue that your parents have had to do refinances or, do all this when they're doing their purchasing. So it's not a very, what I call sexy profession.
No, not sexy.
That most people don't know about it. I mean, like I mentioned VCU earlier with their master's program, there's 2 tracks in that. You can become an appraiser or you can go into development, real estate development and commercial brokerage. Yeah. So everybody goes that direction that's not the appraisal side because they look at the appraisers going, this is a lot of work. I can probably make more money in development, that kind of thing. But the thing about it is I love what I do. It affords me a lot of flexibility in my schedule. The other things that I want to do in my life, I can go do. It's afforded me a very comfortable lifestyle. And by no means am I even near the NBA minimum. You mentioned LeBron James. No way I'm near that level.
Not hitting the minimums yet. We got to get to the minimums.
But I do well, and my son does well.
Good for you.
And a lot of people that I consider to be my peers, like yourself, we all have found a way to make a very good lifestyle out of what we do, doing something that we like to do. And I will mention this too. if you're considering as a possibility for your future, there's an aging out that's getting ready to happen in this profession. I mean, the
Oh,
median
yes.
age, the last time I saw the data for an SRA, which is a residential designation for the Appraisal Institute, is 63.
That's the median. And for those that are not into math and statistic terms, that means when you look at the whole body of people in there and you go towards that central point, it's all the way up. Versus if you look at the national population that's at work right now, it tends to be between 28 and 32. So it's literally double the national average for those that are employed in any profession, if to kind of give you a sense of the number that Woody just shared.
So what that means is that if you're in your mid or early 20s and you get into this profession in the next 10 to 15 years, because of just normal aging out and just normal attrition that's going to happen because of that median age, there's going to be a lot of folks in great positions to really do something and do something well, because there's going to be what I call a brain drain. It is definitely something that's going to happen. There's no way around it. The math proves it. If this is a possibility for you, then I would tell you to look at it very strongly. There's a lot of opportunity in doing it, and there's a lot of flexibility, because as we've talked about for this last several minutes, you can do everything from regular mortgage work up to very specialized work. I mean, I'll mention one more colleague, and that's Stephen Roach out in San Diego.
Oh, yeah.
He exists solely on litigation work. That's his specialty, and he flies all over the country doing it. I mean, he's like the Mickey Mantle of what we do. And I look at him in awe, and I'm like, oh my God, that would be so cool to be at that level. But he spent 30 years getting to that level. So
any place valuable to get to, and requires time and energy, all invested in the pursuit of where you want to get to. So it's not an overnight success, but nonetheless, it is fruitful on the way upon ascending to it. So these are fantastic nuggets, Woody. This has just been a wonderful opportunity to hear about your experience, your exposure, the people that you've met along the way, the relationships that you've cultivated, as well as just some good old-fashioned hard work and experiencing the results of that, much like planting seeds and then allowing those seeds to both break through the soil and then nurture them and cultivate them, and then be able to experience a bit of harvesting there, and ongoingly so in a very positive way, and a wonderful contribution to the industry that you are. So really appreciate it, Woody.
Thanks. And Mike, if I can leave you with a quote.
Of course.
And of course, I'm going to paraphrase it because I don't know it verbatim. But one of my hobbies is music. So I'm big into hard rock, metal, that kind of thing. Steven Tyler, the lead singer from Aerosmith, I read an interview with him many, many years ago. And, they were asking him, what was his advice for young musicians getting into it? And it was sage advice. It's work really hard, put your head down, and the money part of it will take care of itself. And I think that applies to anything that you do in life. Don't worry so much about the monetary return on it. That'll come as you get better at doing it. But if this is something that you really love and want to do, I think that there's a lot of truth to what he's saying. Just put your head on the grindstone and go.
Excellent words of wisdom from Woody to wrap up with. Thank you again for a wonderful segment. We look forward to seeing you or hearing from you, and allowing you to hear our next wonderful guest. Until then, have a great day.
Thanks, Mike.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Paruzing's Appraisers on Purpose. We hope you enjoyed learning from the amazing life paths and achievements of our guests. Don't forget to like us on LinkedIn and other podcast channels to hear more from appraisers and valuers regarding their life and their work. If you have any suggestions or questions for future episodes, we'd love to hear from you. Just send us a message on LinkedIn and we'll be sure to get back to you. Thanks again for listening, and until we're together again for the next session of Paruzing's Appraisers on Purpose, create the change that you seek.